Welcome, everyone. Welcome back to the show. It's your host, Danny Dhaiphong. As you can see, I am joined by Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, former Army Colonel, retired Army Colonel, and former Chief of Staff for Colin Powell. And we have former CIA analyst Larry Johnson, both of them geopolitical analysts now in their own right. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining me today.
Hey, thank you, Danny.
Good to be with you.
It's great to be with you. Everyone, let's get a like storm going. Hit the like button as you come on. That helps boost the show, and the algorithm gets these voices spread as far across YouTube as possible. So Vladimir Putin has just sent a chilling warning ahead of the talks with the United States that lasted about 5 hours, saying that Russia is ready for war with Europe as threats of a preemptive strike from NATO become more severe. The collective West is desperately trying, gentlemen, to hide devastating battlefield losses that have occurred on the Ukrainian front line. Now, here is Vladimir Putin, what he had to say ahead of these talks in his own words.
Europe wants to fight, and if they start this fight, then we are ready right now. There is no doubt about this. But the only question is, if Europe starts the war, unleashes this war, because that's not Ukraine. With Ukraine, we use some surgical means. We are trying to be really careful. Because you understand why. This is not a war in the direct sense of the word. And Europe, all of a sudden, wants to start a war. And if it does start a war, then very rapidly there might be a situation where we have no one to negotiate with.
So those are pretty strong words. Let's start with you, Larry. No one to negotiate with if this war begins. Talk about what's causing this warning, what precipitated it, and what does Putin mean when he says that Russia is ready?
Well, this was all precipitated by some very intemperate comments. One by an Italian admiral talking about launching preemptive strikes on Russia. And then talk coming out of Germany about building up their army so that they can go to war with Russia. And, here the Russians going, oh, gee, that sounds familiar, that we getting attacked by Germany. So it's been in, that's sort of the context for Putin's remarks. What the West fails to understand is when Putin calling the operation in Ukraine a special military operation, he's not playing with words. It means something very specific, very precise. That is, Russia is not treating this like a war. If they were treating this like an actual war, they would mobilize at least 5 million reservists that they have. Stas Krapivnik, who served as he was promotable to major, I guess, when he left the U.S. Army, and he now lives in Russia. He tells me that actually the number is closer to 10 million. But Russia would fully mobilize. All conventional economic activity not contributing to the war effort would be subjugated to the war. And Russia, the bear would stand up, and they would not limit strikes, as they've been limiting strikes in Ukraine. They really could have shut the whole thing down early on, but that's not been their objective. Their objective was initially to create enough pressure militarily to bring Ukraine to the negotiating table, which it did in March of 2022, but that failed because of pressure from the West. So Russia then had to pivot and start building up its force without going into full mobilization. The only mobilization they did was in September of 2022. Since then, they've been relying upon conscripts to the tune of about 30,000 a month, and contract soldiers, people who sign up voluntarily. They have built up their force over time. And that's why now in 2025, we're seeing Russia finally with the manpower that they can carry out attacks along 8 axes of attack. In the past, they were able to only do 1, possibly 2. And the reason for that was they did not have enough military force in terms of manpower in place, because it's not just about being able to attack and move forward occupying territory, but it's also a matter of, do you have enough forces to defend that which you take? And so the Russians haven't been under any time pressure to do this, but they've been moving very methodically. And so what Putin was laying out here is, we've been in a controlled attack with Ukraine because they're actually our brothers, our sisters, our cousins. These are Slavs. They're like us. And just remember, General Syrskyi, the head of the Ukrainian army, his parents live in Russia and are drawing, Russian Social Security payments, for God's sake, and getting Russian health care. So this is not just a throwaway line. It's real. You've got Ukrainians married to Russians, Russians married to Ukrainians. So the family stuff crosses the borders. But the Europeans, that's a whole nother matter. They've been involved with invading Russia in the past. Russia hasn't forgotten that. And by God, if they cross that line, Russia will crush them.
Yeah, Colonel Wilkerson, maybe you can get into exactly how this will come about, because obviously Russia has developed major capabilities. And then there's this, NATO is warning Russia it may hit first as hybrid attacks intensify. It's weighing a more provocative response, including cyber strikes, sabotage, and airspace violations, with officials even considering a preemptive strike. Doesn't this provoke Russia into doing exactly what Putin said he might do, which is if NATO starts this, if Europe starts this, then there will be no one to negotiate with? That seems to be coming from a position of confidence. Colonel Wilkerson, what's your assessment? Oh, sorry, you're muted. Hold on one second. Continue.
I did an interview with Rick Sanchez, Russia Today, a couple of days ago, and we got on about 9:20, and all of a sudden we had to interrupt the interview, which I was more than willing to do because we were listening to Putin live give a talk, give a speech. And so Rick and I just sat there and listened to him, and for once the translator was very good. And what Putin did was describe the economic situation in Russia. And his language was crisp, to the point, dynamic, probably very accurate. That's my guess anyway, and it's an educated guess. And it said, essentially, we are not only in better shape than when the special military operation started, we are in what I would call superb shape, considering what we've done. And we could go a lot further in what we've done. I believe him. And I think probably the discussion afterwards sort of corroborated that. And I'm getting to my point here. The next film that Rick showed me was Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff and Dmitriev walking out of wherever they had been and into Moscow Central and going on a tour. And Rick said, what does that signify? And I said, it signifies that Donald Trump has returned to Donald Trump. Donald Trump is remembering what Sergei Lavrov told Marco Rubio in Riyadh a few months ago about the 300 billion, I think it was, in commerce that he had forfeited by not working smoothly with Russia anymore. Donald Trump has never lost sight of that. And what that signified to me, and I told Rick this, I said, to me, that means that Donald Trump has given up on Ukraine. Not that he ever was a big advocate for it, but he was going along with it, as Putin said himself once or twice. Every time he talks to the Europeans, he changes his mind, whether it's Anchorage and then a talk, or whether it's Budapest and being canceled or whatever. So now we're seeing the money man, Jared Kushner, the money man for Donald Trump, and Witkoff, the other real estate agent who sort of pretends to be a diplomat. And they're cavorting around Moscow and looking at how clean and beautiful and prosperous Moscow is. And they're envisioning hotels and casinos and whatever else Donald Trump wants to build. And they're envisioning getting beyond Ukraine. So Putin now has another incentive to speak as he just spoke. And that is, I won't have the very heavily nuclear armed and potent still that yet declining empire as an enemy, because Donald and I are going to see eye to eye on this. And it ain't going to be 28 points. It ain't going to be 58 points. It ain't going to be 2 points. It's going to be whatever we decide. And maybe I'll give him a little headroom so he can add it to his Peace Prize application. But other than that, I'm going to be triumphant in this. And you damn Europeans, you start anything and I'll destroy you. That's the way I read it.
Yeah, and Larry, where does this fit into things? Putin also warned of possible strikes on Ukraine's allies' ships, which I would assume includes a lot of NATO. He warned Russia may consider striking ships of countries supporting Ukraine if a surge in attacks on Moscow's tanker fleet doesn't halt. What Ukrainian armed forces are doing now is piracy. That's what Putin said to reporters in Moscow. Talk about this situation. Where does it fit into this climbing of the escalation ladder by Europe that Colonel Wilkerson was alluding to, as well as these dynamics that led to this comment by Putin, which is a comment he doesn't generally make publicly, especially before negotiations. What's your thoughts?
Again, to draw the distinction between a special military operation and war. Under the special military operation, Russia has not used the Black Sea Fleet of the Russian Navy to shutter to impose an effective embargo on all ships entering and leaving Ukrainian ports. Odessa is still considered a Ukrainian port. Russia has not, like the Houthis. You remember when the Houthis shut down the Red Sea, and any ship that was headed to Israel was going to get shot at. The Russians have the potential. They have the capability to do that. They haven't. I know some like this knucklehead General Ben Hodges claimed that the Ukraine has decimated the Black Sea Fleet. And apparently, he doesn't pay attention that whenever Russia decides to do a major missile launch, the Black Sea Fleet goes out in the middle of that body of water and fires away its missiles into Ukraine. So the next step, this attack that took place really almost in Turkish territorial waters against ships that were headed to Russia, is viewed as really an act of war, and it's recognized that Ukraine's not doing this on its own; it's doing it with British support. What was interesting is within hours of that hit on those ships, Russia launched some Iskander missiles into an area outside of Odessa that was as a headquarters described for British special operations officers as well as Ukrainian officers. And the site was struck, and reportedly a number of those personnel were killed. So, but Russia can escalate this. They can then say, okay, you're going to do that. We're going to shut down access to Odessa. But again, one of the reasons Russia hasn't done that up to now is that there were exports coming out of Ukraine, grain in particular, that was then going to countries in the global south. And Russia made a point of not wanting to disrupt the economies of other countries in the global south that it was aligned with. And so maintaining this as a special military operation as opposed to war is the reason for that. But, the importance of the Dnieper in terms of being a waterway for bringing critical, not only grains, corn, wheat, barley, coal, any other natural resources of Ukraine that were previously exported. They can't use the lower half of the Dnieper River anymore. Below Zaporizhia, it's basically a dam blew up, and there's really no more transit going south. And now, as Russia extends its control along the east bank of the Dnieper around Zaporizhia, Ukraine can't do that. So, but there are limits here because it is a SMO.
Yeah, Colonel Wilkerson, what makes this all so suicidal? Because you have guys like Mark Rutte. This is what he had to say before the big ministers meeting that they're holding without, of course, the U.S.'s participation.
$1 billion a month, August, September, October, November. And I'm cautiously optimistic that we will reach the 5 billion for the full year. And then for next year, we need for the full year, again, a lot of money, at least 1 billion, maybe even a little bit more than 1 billion a month. It might be around 50, maybe a little bit more for the whole year when it comes to this crucial US gear. So this is offensive and defensive, including interceptors for the air defense systems. Crucial to keep Ukrainian civilians and civilian infrastructure safe. So it is really good that this flow is there, that Europeans are stepping up, and Canada, by the way.
So they're talking about $1 billion a month from NATO buying all these weapons, and as well as threatening a preemptive strike on Russia. What makes all this suicidal, Colonel Wilkerson? Oh, sorry about that. Hold on. Continue.
To whom are they going to give the weapons to shoot, to employ? There's not going to be any Ukrainian military left very shortly. And I suspect there's not going to be any Zelensky left very shortly either, one way or the other. This thing is winding down. I don't for a minute say that there aren't going to be some recriminations and some bitterness for a decade or more as it does wind down. But it's winding down in terms of a genuine special military operation, as Larry says. And Putin is winding it down on Ukrainian dead bodies. So I don't see that it's going to go on much further, except in this kind of guerrilla type business that inevitably the Ukrainians will carry on. And if Europe thinks it's going to be propitious for them, and Mark Rutte is a nut, just like Jens Stoltenberg before him, they think NATO is not moribund. NATO is moribund. They have both their feet in a grave, and they don't realize it. That's the stupidest kind of person on earth, who's in his grave and doesn't realize it. So what are they going to do? Whom are they going to give this money to in the future? Whom are they going to support in the future? Other than a bunch of Nazi guerrillas who want to continue the campaign regardless, and whom Russia will seek out and destroy over time anyway. So I don't understand how they're going to perpetuate this. And as I just said, they've lost their big sugar daddy. And when that realization hits them really smack in the face, they're going to understand just how lost they are and how they are even deepening the profoundness of that loss by their own behavior.
Yeah. Larry, when they talk about preemptive strike, I mean, what possibly could happen there? It just feels like with the Ukraine situation deteriorating like it is, a NATO preemptive strike would put it directly in the crosshairs of Russia. And I know you've been studying Russia's arsenal quite deeply. Vladimir Putin said straight up, there won't be anyone to negotiate with, alluding to the fact that Europe won't be there anymore because Russia has the capability to do that. But is this a bluff? Is this true? What is the reality of Russia's capabilities versus Europe?
Europe has almost zero capability, and not as a collective. They, individual states, they have, the UK has nuclear weapons, but they, if you recall, that the Europeans came back with an amendment to the 28 peace plan, 28-point peace plan. Wanting to raise the army of Ukraine to 800,000. And it's, I found that hilarious because if you take the combined army of the UK, France, and Germany together, they only come up, they're just shy of 500,000. So here they're asking a country of Ukraine that's got 19 million people, supposedly, down from 43 million, to come up with 800,000 soldiers, when the UK, France, and Germany can't even muster 500,000. Now, if you add in Turkey, Turkey's got an army, standing army of about 320,000. Then, think of that. The Europeans are proposing that Ukraine get an army that's comparable to the armies of Turkey, France, Germany, and England, or the United Kingdom. It's delusional, absolutely crazy stuff. So. Russia's got has hypersonic missiles. Europe does not. And when we're talking hypersonic, these are missiles that travel at Mach 6 or above and are maneuverable. Russia has effective air defense, S-400, S-500, S-550, Panzer systems. Europe does not. Russia has now a cruise missile that is nuclear powered, that can fly great distances, seemingly fly for forever or a long time without having to be refueled. It has the Oreshnik missile, which is, seems to operate like a bolt of lightning is the way to describe it. Again, Europe has no defense for that. So, with respect to the once highly respected navies of these countries, the only thing they share, the Germans, the French, and the Brits and the Poles, what they share in common is that when they send their ships out of port to go join a military exercise, if you bet money that the ship will break down, you'd be a millionaire. Okay. And more often than not, the ships, they can't get out of port. They have to go back and be repaired again. Or when they do get out, they run into each other. So, what you're looking at is a broken military as far as NATO is concerned. And none of these countries field any armies that are capable. Hell, if Ukraine was fighting Germany, Germany would lose. If Ukraine was fighting France, France would lose. If Ukraine was fighting the Brits would lose. So, and who's training the Ukrainians? Oh, the French, the British, and the Germans. Oh boy, there's a toxic collection. I mean, it's this. Look, if people weren't dying and suffering the way they were, this would be hilarious. This would be like a Monty Python skit on steroids. But
just to add to that, Danny, I'm hearing and have been hearing for some time that whenever the navies put to sea, they have to rape the entire other ships in the fleet, such as they are few, in order to man them. So,
yeah.
Colonel Wilkerson, same question to you, please, your commentary.
Well, I just what Larry said. This is nonsense. I mean, people like Ruta and others are just speaking nonsense. There's no way they're going to take Russia on. And if they start doing little pinprick things, like have been suggested, they're going to regret it because he's going to respond. And I suspect he's going to respond not in kind, but overwhelmingly. And like Larry was just talking about, that hit outside Odessa or on the outskirts of Odessa that took out several people. I don't know how many it killed. I heard that it killed quite a few, but that's what he's going to do. And he's going to be very circumspect about the way he does it, but there's only so much circumspection in Putin. Eventually, he's going to send a signal that says, stop now.
Yeah, and Larry, a final comment on this before moving on. In my estimation, any kind of preemptive strike here would not require Russia to send in massive numbers of troops because it's not the same situation as Ukraine. Ukraine, you said, it's brothers, it's people with a large identification with Russia and Russian people. This is different, and it's also on the border, but this is different. A preemptive strike from NATO, Europe, whatever they have, Russia would fight a very different war. Am I right about that?
Oh, well, heavens, yes. Look, and I want to credit Danny Davis with this observation. Look at the number of missiles, Iskanders and drones that Russia fires and has been firing now over the last 3 years, 10 months into Ukraine. So, I mean, we're now over tens of thousands of rockets and missiles. Has it crippled Ukraine? No. Has Ukraine imploded? No. Has Ukraine suffered significant damage? Well, yes, the answer is that. Well, so why does NATO, which has only a fraction of the missiles and drones that Russia has, think that it can launch attacks inside Russia that will, quote, cripple Russia. Russia's economy is multiples of what Ukraine's is. Russia's right now, their debt to GDP ratio is 19%, whereas the debt to GDP ratio in Ukraine is well over 120%. Ukraine does not even have really what's close to a functioning economy. And the landmass that Russia represents, it doesn't have all of its oil resources concentrated in just one spot. And anyway, the belief that if they somehow knock out Russia's ability to export oil, that it's going to cripple the Russian economy. It is not. The Russian economy is not dependent upon oil and gas exports. And plus, now bulk of the trade is going with China anyway, so they don't need Europe in that regard. So you can't, can they launch some attacks that will cause some devastation? Yeah. Go back and look at World War II. There's a great series on YouTube that it's World War II diary. And what it is, it takes actually day by day by day throughout the entirety of the war, from the start of when the Germans invade Poland in September of 1939, all the way up to the signing of the surrender by the Japanese in August of 1945. And in the early days of that war, from like 1940, 41 into 42, the number of merchant marine ships that were getting sunk was incredible. 1 or 2 a day at least. But the West still won. So yeah, you can launch a missile strike. You can hit some critical centers. That's what these crazy Europeans believe. But Russia can't absorb the blows. It's big enough and it's got enough strategic depth, unlike Ukraine. And what has been sort of the consequence of the Russian strategy over the last 3+ years is by running this war of attrition, they are now they've literally squeezed the life out of Ukraine. And Ukraine now no longer can provide manpower to sustain itself. Its economy is in tatters. And I think it was Clausewitz that argued that more wars have been lost because one country runs out of money than by a strategic battle. And candidly, I think that's actually where it's going to be the combination of losses on the battlefield coupled with the collapse of the economy. Because right now it looks like the United States has pulled the plug on support. And without Uncle Sugar there to pour his sugar out, the Europeans are in no position. I mean, they're not daddy warbucks sitting on billions of dollars and warehouses stuffed with weapons and food and whatever supplies Ukraine would need. They're struggling economies as well. So I think Ukraine's days are now numbered.
Well, we can get into this now because what I've noticed, Colonel Wilkerson, is that there's been actually quite a narrative spin, as well as almost like a discrediting of Russia's recent gains. Here is CNN, the message behind Putin's camouflage-clad claim of victory in a key Ukrainian city. He was dressed head to toe in army fatigues, where he received news he had been waiting for more than a year. Russia had taken over the Ukrainian city of Pokrovsk. It doesn't matter that Kiev disputed the claim or that fighting was still going on in the city, but it does not match the reality, according to Putin. Here is what Putin had to say in his own words, and then I'll get your commentary, Colonel Wilkerson. Oh, sorry about that. Hold on one second. I got to get this out of here. All right, here we go.
Overall, we can see that the combined group of forces, they continue to apply more and more pressure along the entire front line. We have established control over some large settlements that have great significance for future operations to liberate the entire territory, including the territory that is still controlled by the enemy.
So, Colonel Wilkerson, maybe you can go over what exactly has actually happened And as you do, I'll play a video without any sound that talks about this idea that it's Russian claims. This is what we hear over and over again. Russian claims that Pokrovsk has been taken. Russia claims that it's advancing. But this sows doubt that it actually isn't. What's the reality?
Who are the people who are advocating or talking about or describing this situation as being advantageous in any way, fashion, or form to the Ukrainians? U.S. generals? U.S. admirals? Who are they?
Nobody.
No, I mean, I'm serious. Who are the people who are saying that in this particular instance, Pokrovsk belongs more to the Ukrainians still than it belongs to the Russians? Or for that matter,
Ben Hodges said it just.
Trying to get Danny to say that. These guys are idiots, or they're on someone's payroll. Someone who's paying them as they did during the Gulf War, I'm sad to say. Several generals who went on and talked about how it wasn't an insurgency, the second Gulf War. It wasn't an insurgency, that Rumsfeld was right, that everything was copacetic. There wasn't anything tragic going on, that there was no group of people getting together to fight us for the next 6 or 7 years, that everything was as it had been depicted in the beginning when the statue came down and everything. These are the same people who get paid to go on CNN and other mainstream news networks or write in newspapers and say things are opposite of what they really are. Unfortunately, that doesn't change the facts on the ground. And it's very dangerous to do because it convinces people that they should support an effort on beyond where they should. Now, my question would be, how much of this is affecting European leaders? How much do they have of that same content in their own countries? And what I've seen in France in particular, not so much the British Empire, but British Empire, my ass, not so much, not so much Britannia, and not so much Germany. France has been pretty bad about this. They've had a couple of generals come out and make these really stupid comments, but this is a bunch of people who are paid to tell lies. I mean, I can't put it any more bluntly than that. And that's what they're doing. They're telling lies. And the facts on the battlefield dispute what they're saying. I'm sad to say, too, that this has been going on all along. Whether you're talking about Petraeus, you're talking about Sinecure, you're talking about any of these people. God, I used an obsolete term. Combatant commander in Europe. They just are singing off an entirely false sheet of music. And whether they're doing it because they're strategic idiots or tactical idiots or operational idiots, or whether they're doing it because they're being paid is, I think, a matter that should be looked into. But we're killing people. We're killing people on the high seas without authority. We're killing people in double taps. We're doing all kinds of crap. So who am I to accuse these people of lying? We've got a whole administration that's operating unconstitutionally, illegally.
Yeah. Larry, maybe if you could help illuminate, some of the details of these battlefield gains by Russia, because what we're hearing in the Western mainstream media, I was playing that video, it's all claims, right? They can't be verified that these battlefield victories are happening, yet there's plenty of evidence, it seems, that the Ukrainian front line for the Ukrainian side is crumbling.
Go
ahead.
No, I was just going to say it's being rolled up.
Yeah. The thing, I think a lot of these Western analysts have failed to grasp and understand, and really they should know better, is Russia, and in fact, Danny Davis, I think, summarized it best. Russia went in February 2022 with Plan A. They didn't have a Plan B in place. And the Plan B would say, well, okay, if they reject our negotiating posture, then we're going to shift to more of a wartime footing, which is exactly that's what happened. The negotiations were tanked by the West at the end of March, and then Russia turned itself and focused on taking Mariupol, because when you look at the map, Mariupol was a city that sits right on the Sea of Azov, and so it was an important access to the sea, and so Russia had to close that off, and they finished that off in May 31st of 2022. From that point on, though, Russia did not immediately start mobilizing, and you could fault the general staff for having made some mistakes in their planning, because by August, a large number of contract soldiers, their contracts were up, they left, so the actual effective ground force of Russia was quite reduced, and the West was aware of this, which is why Ukraine, NATO helped Ukraine launch an offensive that drove the Russians out of places like Kharkiv, forced them to retreat further back to the east in the Donbass, and had to withdraw from the Kherson, on the left, if you will, the west bank of Kherson. They went back on the other side, and it was only in September of 2022 that they started mobilizing. Well, when you start mobilizing forces, they don't come, already dressed in uniform, ready to fight. They have to go through, they have to be properly equipped, they have to be trained, and then they have to be deployed. And normally that process is going to take a minimum of 3 months, and more likely with brand new recruits who haven't had prior service, 6 months at a minimum. And so when you start building up, Russia's building up its ground forces, it was still didn't have enough personnel in place. They started off with about 500,000 roughly in 2022. They've now tripled that over the course of the last 3+ years. And so, when you're launching an offensive along one axis, then once you achieve that objective, let's say like they did achieve taking Bakhmut in January 2023, then the following year in 2024, Avdiivka. It was not long distance. These were not massive acquisitions of territory, but once you take it, then you got to hold it. And see, that was one of the problems they had up in Kherson back in 2022 when the Ukrainians attacked. They basically had a bunch of military police around. They didn't have the arms and vehicles necessary to fend off an invasion, so they had to withdraw. Well, now, as Russia has been steadily advancing, and somehow at a snail's pace, but part of that snail's pace was imposed because they didn't have sufficient ground forces in place. Jump to 2025, completely different picture. At least 750,000 ground forces now that are deployed all along that line of contact, which is now why we're seeing Russia launch attacks in 8 distinct areas or axes along that line of contact. Now it's created a tremendous strategic problem for Ukraine, who doesn't have the manpower to rush reinforcements to stop an attack in one area. Or if they do try to reinforce one area, they're taking from another area. And then we're watching down in Zaporizhia in particular. Russia has, since September, has captured 30 different settlements. There's 30 or 34. Total captures along that line of contact since September, 86 different settlements, villages, towns. We had, this is more, they've captured more of that in 3 months than they did in previous 2 years, all along the line of contact. So it was a matter of getting the proper amount of forces in place. But again, Russia wasn't panicked. They didn't have a gun to their head. It wasn't, this wasn't a timed football game where, okay, your 90 minutes are up. If you don't get your goal kicked quick, it's over. No, they've got time. And again, they're treating it as a special military operation. They haven't had to sacrifice economic growth. They haven't had to deprive people of critical resources. They're able to, life is going on, but they're taking care of business as far as they're concerned.
Yeah. And where do the talks, Colonel Wilkerson, fit into all of this? Because Witkoff and a delegation went to Russia, spoke for 5 hours with Putin and the Russian side. and there was no real big breakthroughs. How does this fit into this larger picture that Larry was just laying out on the battlefield?
Well, how do we know there wasn't a real breakthrough? And how do we know what a breakthrough is and how to describe it if we did?
Good question.
The fact that they sat down for as long as they did, and the fact that they have now, I think, at least that's what I've been told, that they have actually put together working groups. And the working groups have different missions and different objectives. And as they work towards those objectives and missions, you'll see more coming out. But I doubt that you're going to see it very fast, because the more that comes out that is, shall I say, successful, the more they're to incur the wrath of the Europeans and, to a certain extent, Zelensky, though I think he's short-lived. And they don't want to do that. So I don't think there's going to be a lot coming out until it comes out in a package, and the package is sellable, at least on the two sides that really count. That is to say, Washington and Moscow. I don't think the Europeans are going to get anything but a deal shoved down their throats at the end of the day. And they can either take it and squawk, or they can do, as you've just intimated, Ruto was thinking about doing or talking about doing, and that is throw their weight into trying to counter what has been accomplished. I don't think that's going to work. They could exacerbate, as I said, the conflict, keep it going for a long time with a little money pouring in and arms and such, maybe some mercenaries. So I don't think any are going to want to go to a side that's completely defeated. So I just think this is going to be a different kind of set of talks. And I don't mean different in the sense that it's different from any other similar talks that have taken place, because you don't let everything out until you've got something. And when you've got something, you let it out in one big swoop, and you go from there to success, you hope.
Yeah. Yeah, well, Russia has been decrying, Larry. I'm sure you're aware of the megaphone diplomacy approach from certain, especially Europe, but even the U.S. Taking to the media, talking about details before they happen and after they happen. What's your reaction to how these talks have gone? Since the last time we spoke, of course, there's been a lot of drama around this idea of a peace plan led by Trump. So what's your assessment of how it all fits in here?
Well, let's be clear about what happened yesterday in the meeting that Putin had with both Witkoff and Kushner. Witkoff's a friend, as far as Trump is concerned. Kushner's family. The purpose of this meeting was not to negotiate over the 28-point plan or the 19-point plan. It was more for President Putin, once again, to establish very clearly that what the Russian non-negotiable points are. This, because the typical way, these real estate guys, Trump and Witkoff, approach the art of the deal is, you set out an extreme position and then you're going to back down from that. And if they approach this with the Russians saying, yeah, the Russians say that they're going to keep Donetsk, Luhansk, Kherson, and Zaporizhia, but that's just a negotiating position. Maybe we can talk them down that they can keep Donetsk and Luhansk, but they'll give up Zaporizhia, Kherson. No, not going to happen, because those four former Ukrainian oblasts, along with Crimea, are now permanently part of Russia, and Putin does not have either the political power nor the legal authority to change their status. So that's non-negotiable. I think this 4.5-hour meeting was designed principally to make sure that Witkoff and Kushner understood what Russia's firm positions are. Because Putin said last week in Bishkek, when he was asked about the negotiations, he made a point of emphasizing that when they get underway, Sergei Lavrov will be directly involved in leading the process, and emphasized that along with him would be Medinsky, the guy who previously was negotiating with the Ukrainians in Istanbul, who had 2 meetings this year, and Ushakov, Yuri Ushakov, who's sort of the national security advisor to Putin. But that those three, he emphasized, that's my negotiating team. They're the ones who will do this actual work that needs to be done. But what he was conveying to Witkoff and Kushner is that, those 5 former Ukrainian territories, they're now permanently part of Russia. Ukraine needs to get out and retreat from those areas. They can do it willingly, or we're going to drive them out. Well, either or, but they don't get to stay. Ukraine has got to hold elections so that we have somebody who legally is entitled to act on behalf of the Ukrainian people, because he's emphasized very strongly this week that the current gang, as you called them in Ukraine, are a bunch of criminals and are not legitimate. And said, I'm not going to talk to criminals. I'm not going to negotiate with illegitimate people. And the talk that they're going to bring back Zaluzhny, the former commander of the Ukrainian army, now ambassador to the UK, that ain't going to fly either, because he's closer to the Azov battalion, right sector, all these neo-fascist groups, neo-Nazi groups. So the Russia won't deal with him either. It's got to be somebody who's elected and who has been, as the Russians say, denazified. NATO got to get out. They can't stay. Under no circumstances is Russia going to tolerate continued NATO presence in Ukraine. And then the reduction of the size of the Ukrainian military. That's going to be, they'll negotiate about the actual size, but the European proposal, that 800,000, non-starter. So it is now incumbent upon Witkoff and Kushner to go back and remind Donald Trump that, no, actually, Vladimir Putin meant everything he told you in August. And so this is where the outline of the deal starts. And it looks like Trump is ready to start acting on that, because the reports are that this week they have completely suspended sending all military assistance to Ukraine. It's not clear if they've cut off intelligence sharing, but they're also the whole pursuit of the corruption angle. So this is, when he tossed Yermak from the boat, and then also Timur Mindich got tossed. And what's really so ironic about all of this is Zelensky, about 9 years ago, played a character in a TV series in which Timur, the guy was named Mindich, his character in the thing was trying to escape Ukraine because of corruption. I mean, you can't make this up. It's like what was written as a TV show has now become the reality in Ukraine.
Yeah. Colonel Wilkerson, how much is Russia dictating the terms and the process here? Because Russia has been taking a very specific approach, and I'm curious about your thoughts on this.
Almost totally. And I would say that the only place I would differ with Larry a little bit, and not much, is that Witkoff and Kushner already have pretty substantial marching orders. Not that they would have revealed that at the moment to Putin or any of his spokespersons or representatives, nor anyone else involved. I think they're exclusive in that regard. And all they're going to be doing is reporting back to Trump what Trump already knows. So all they're going to find out from Trump is just how much they should push, and it isn't going to be much.
Yeah. And finally, on this question of the battlefield, gentlemen, Larry, if you could just speak to exactly whether you think that this is still going to be resolved on the battlefield, because this peace process appears to be one that is going to be long if the results of these meetings are any indication, it seems like that Russia is really interested in talking about each point very methodically and pushing their position as far as they can get it. And it seems that it has every right to do that. So does Ukraine even have enough time to make it through this process?
Short answer, no. Look, it's not an act by the Russians. They, despite claims from many Western military analysts, and I'm particularly thinking of that knucklehead Ben Hodges. There's Mario Nawfal hosted a debate last week between Danny Davis and Ben Hodges. I encourage you to watch it because as I was watching, I called my local police department to report a case of elder abuse. Danny whooped up on Hodges so bad, he felt, oh my God. But, one of the things that Hodges was saying that was just so objectively stupid is, oh, Putin has broken every agreement he's ever signed. And they're going, oh, Putin violated the anti-ballistic missile treaty agreement? Oh, no, that was George W. Bush. Putin violated the intermediate nuclear forces agreement? No, that was Donald Trump. Putin broke Minsk too? No, actually, Putin wasn't a signatory to Minsk II. Putin was a guarantor, along with the French and the Brits and Belarus. That agreement was signed between the militias in the Donbass, or the governing authorities in the Donbass, and the government of Ukraine. But nonetheless, they continue to push this mythology that Russia doesn't negotiate in good faith. They've always negotiated in good faith. And in fact, they're sort of overly legalistic in that regard. And maybe you can attribute that to Putin's background as a lawyer, and he very much thinks about it according to law. But there's also Lavrov and the foreign ministry. The tradition is we're gonna pay attention to what the treaties say. They should. We've written them down. They should mean what they say. The United States is the one who's frequently just breaking these agreements or saying that they don't apply. So this process, how long did the process in the Vietnam War go on? 4 years, the talks in Paris. So the negotiations, I think what's likely to happen is once Lavrov sits down with Marco Rubio, then the actual negotiating process will be underway. But there will be a lot of details to hammer out, and that's not going to get hammered out in one meeting or two meetings. I mean, it's going to extend over several months. And so, meanwhile, Russia is going to continue moving on the battlefield. And that's where the rapid changes that are taking place now are significant. And it very well, the battlefield will come to a conclusion much quicker than the negotiating process.
But,
yeah, Colonel Wilkerson, please.
I was just going to say there's one you left out, Larry. It's ancillary, but it is indicative, and it's the JCPOA.
Yeah.
I think I would really be surprised if Marco Rubio enters this process. I know that sounds weird because he's a Secretary of State, but I don't see him entering this process in a substantive way other than perhaps at the end and holding a bell and ringing it and saying, okay, we've got an agreement. It's everybody signed. And I don't even see him there. And that's a hell of a thing to have to say, but I don't think Trump trusts Marco Rubio. And to put him in this environment after Witkoff and Kushner have gotten a deal, and let Marco Rubio foul it up is not Donald Trump's purpose. And so I'd be surprised if he puts him in there. Informally, formally that looks informal or is really informal. Yeah, okay. I don't think he cares for Marco Rubio much.
Colonel Wilkerson, finally, before moving on, I wanted to ask you, do you see Ukraine lasting through this process, being able to make it through a negotiated process as the one that's occurring now?
What do you mean by lasting?
In terms of continuing to fight up until an agreement is reached?
Well, I think they're going to feel that that's a requirement, but I'm not sure they're going to be able to do it. These kinds of things happen dramatically in most cases. When you look at Vietnam, for example, or you look at Korea, or you look at any conflict that we've had direct experience with, and you see how fast it comes apart militarily and diplomatically if you take your eye off the ball, so to speak, or if things are coming to some kind of dramatic end because of the dynamics of the battlefield, and suddenly those dynamics take over big time. You may wind up having people running away from the fight, as it were. You may wind up having Zelensky assassinated. You could have almost anything happen as things get really, really dire.
Colonel Wilkerson, I know that you have some time constraints. I did want to cover the Hegseth war crimes situation, and you can leave whenever you feel like you need to before we get started on that, and while we're in the process of talking about that, so no worries. But let's begin. Larry, there is another war that is brewing. It's unclear how soon or if and what kind of action Donald Trump will take, but indeed he has backed himself in quite the corner when it comes to Venezuela. But as this has happened, as you both have probably been following, there's been a major war crime scandal that has taken somewhat of a partisan character, but also it's reaching across the general population. And I wanted to play here's what our friend Judge Napolitano had to say on Newsmax about this situation, which involves Hegseth's possible orders to kill all of the surviving fishermen or boat occupants as part of this long, months-long battle that the U.S. has been waging on the seas, murdering dozens and dozens of people. Here we go.
Pleasure to say what I'm about to say because I worked with Pete Hegseth for 7 or 8 years at Fox News. This is an act of a war crime, ordering survivors who the law requires be rescued instead to be murdered. There's absolutely no legal basis for it. Everybody along the line who did it, from the Secretary of Defense to the Admiral to the people who actually pulled the trigger, should be prosecuted for a war crime for killing these two people.
So that's in reference to the September strike that is in question. But of course, there's been many more. And before I get your take, Larry, here's what the Pentagon spokesperson had to say, almost outing the entire chain of command in this debacle.
Can you talk about the autonomy that's given to the commanders who are carrying out these operations, like Admiral Bradley, to make decisions? Like in this case, I'm assuming the first strike took out the boat and any actions that followed. Can you talk about the autonomy they're given?
Absolutely. So the Secretary has been very clear in every statement that we've released about these strikes that they are presidentially directed. And the chain of command functions as it should. And we make sure that commanders on the ground their positions are taken into account, and they are able to tell us and make decisions if they see things that need to be flagged. But at the end of the day, the Secretary and the President are the ones directing these strikes. And any follow-on strikes like those which were directed by Admiral Bradley, the Secretary 100% agrees with.
So there you have it. Larry, what's been your reaction to this debacle? Where does it fit into this overall situation that the United States, as a imperial albatross, so to speak, is in?
Well, it's just, let's call it, it's an exaggerated instance of the abuse and the criminal act of a president. It didn't start with Donald Trump, but you want to go back maybe to the war in Vietnam is where it started, and it became particularly serious. The ability of the United States that has gone around and killed civilians that didn't pose a threat, or just because we said that they posed a threat, we would be happily killing them. Our current justification over the last 24 years has been, we got to fight terrorism, because if they're terrorists, by God, we got to kill them. You can't treat them with any kind of respect like a combatant. The Geneva rules don't apply. Geneva Convention, we can ignore that. And, so you've had George W. Bush authorize killings of civilians. When I was doing all my consulting work with JSOC, they called the drone footage that was coming in, I mean, live. We referred to those channels as kill TV, because you could, tune in and watch a drone go out and, blow people up on the ground without actually having any evidence that they were engaged with acts were in the process of killing or attacking Americans. These are like preemptive strikes. I remember I counted up trying to get an estimate of over like a 6-year period how many we killed. It's like 60,000. And yet killing all those people didn't end the attacks on our soldiers. It required other things that when we started paying sheikhs in Iraq to hire security forces, because a lot of these guys that were planting bombs that were blowing up our troops, they're doing so because they had no other source of income. Jerry Bremer had made sure of that. He'd cut them off. But now Trump has taken this, where the traditional way that the Coast Guard handled these kinds of threats was not by blowing up the boat. They would stop the boat, they would board it, they would seize the contraband, and they would arrest the participants if they were discovered carrying illegal drugs. The kind of I never saw, and I participated in over 253 of these exercises. And usually part of the end of the exercise is, when the force that's been commissioned to carry out a mission, they have to produce a CONOPS and the concept of operations, which goes up the chain of command and then gets signed off on, and then they'll get an execute order. But I never saw once a rule of engagement that was approved for exercises that said, if they look like they're bad guys, go ahead and kill them, or kill them all. Doesn't matter. Women, children, guys, you just kill them all. Never saw that. And as a firearms instructor, I apply the same principle that, what I teach civilians, which is the very last thing you want to do is have to pull out a gun and kill somebody. Taking a human life is something that you need to take very seriously. And you're justified in doing so when that person or persons pose a direct threat to your life, or causing you serious bodily harm, or doing the same to somebody that you're with. Other than that, you don't have authority to just kill somebody. Cops can't just be sitting there saying, I think those guys over on the corner are selling drugs, so I'm going to shoot and kill them now, and then we'll go over and investigate. You don't do that. And that's exactly what Trump is doing. But again, I don't blame Donald Trump in this alone at all. Shame on these military officers that are carrying out these illegal orders. A bunch of cowards. They want the retirement more than they want to stand up and have a good, clear conscience that, no, sir, I am not carrying out that order. So what we do is we stop the boat and we find out if they pose a threat. If they start shooting at us while we're trying to stop the boat, yes, then you can blow them out of the water. All right. They then crossed the line. They bought their ticket to the fireworks. But otherwise, Trump is engaged with a criminal act, as is Pete Hegseth. But it didn't start with them. Remember when Barack Obama ordered the murder of al-Awlaki and his 17-year-old son?
Yeah, I covered that here on this show. Exactly.
Yeah. So, I mean, like I said, this is not about just blaming Donald Trump. Our entire system became broken once George W. Bush got a favorable ruling from the Department of Justice with, guys like John Woo, who said, yeah, torture's not illegal. Go ahead, tune them up. America has lost its moral compass. And this is just one more sad example about it.
Yeah, Colonel Wilkerson, I definitely want your reaction to this, given, you have extensive history inside of the Bush administration and, of course, your overall history. So take it away about what your thoughts are.
I agree with Larry that this has been a trait of the American way of war for a long time. In fact, the last commander, and really a long way back, who actually made it an edict amongst his forces that they would not be like their enemy, in this case, the British, and treat prisoners really badly, like hanging them or castrating them or many of the things the British did. And they would be a very different kind of soldier because they were fighting to prove that a very different kind of soldier could be in existence under George Washington and could win ultimately. Now, they had the French and everything else. We all know the history of that victory. But nonetheless, that was the last commander who really was serious, and his aides were serious about making sure Americans were different from Hessians and from British regulars. Ever since then, we have been fighting Native Americans, for example, with a bloodlust that was incredible. In our own Civil War, we had Nathan Bedford Forrest, who massacred blacks because they were blacks and wearing a uniform, Union uniform at Fort Pillow. And you can go on up, as Larry did. You can go to Vietnam, you can go on to Korea or back to Korea, up to Vietnam and forward, and you can find all these occasions. In the Philippines, we massacred people in a ditch with a machine gun. Teddy Roosevelt even complimented the general until it proved politically inexpedient to do so, and then he had to reverse himself. We have done this sort of thing, but I will take exception to the fact that the President of the United States has been involved viscerally in comporting and approving the policy that approves this sort of thing and then executing it. That begins with George W. Bush and John Yoo and David Addington's opinion on torture being that which happens just short of organ failure. And then everyone from SOF to SOF contractors to the CIA contractors and others in Afghanistan, Iraq, and in secret prisons and elsewhere, actually killing 33 people, the ultimate torture, if you will. They murdered 33 people with presidential approval, formal approval. That was a first. And that's when the slippery slope, I think, that we're on now viciously began, as Larry said. And we're on the slope now that says, for example, you got a guy who bails out of a burning airplane and he's hanging under his canopy, and you come in and machine gun him, which happened in World War II, but it was a war crime. Or you've got someone like, in this case, someone the other day was saying this was simply a double tap operation. They did it purposefully. Double tap is when you kill them in one event, hoping that someone will come to observe it, and then you'll kill that someone too. I think that's a mischaracterization of this. This is a war crime. The judge is right. It's serious because we have gotten to this point because we have a visceral disregard for the Constitution of the United States of America, commencing at the presidential level with George W. Bush, and carried on, as Larry said, through every president since, and coming to Donald Trump, who frankly doesn't give a damn. And we are taking ourselves to a point where not only are we eviscerating our own Constitution, we're eviscerating everything that we've stood for since 1945 and 48, when Geneva codified the Nuremberg Tribunal in many respects, and destroying it. It will come back to haunt us.
Yeah. Well, Larry, I definitely want to get to you. Colonel Wilkerson, you can stay, or if you've got to run, take care. Have a good one.
Yeah,
really good to see you.
Take care.
Goodbye, my friend.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, Larry, I wanted to ask your opinion on where this fits then, because we have a major meltdown right now in the Trump administration over this. And I want to talk to you about where it fits into the overall war that's being drummed up and built upon against Venezuela. But here is Pete Hegseth's meltdown recently in regards to questions about this war crimes probe.
Because the thing was on fire. It was exploded in fire or smoke. Because the thing was on fire. It was exploded in fire or smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war. This is what you in the press don't understand. You sit in your air-conditioned offices or up on Capitol Hill and you nitpick and you plant fake stories in the Washington Post about kill everybody, phrases on anonymous sources not based in anything, not based in any truth at all. And then you want to throw out really irresponsible terms about American heroes, about the judgment that they made. I wrote a whole book on this topic because of what politicians and the press does to warfighters. President Trump has empowered commanders to do what is necessary, which is dark and difficult things in the dead of night on behalf of the American people. We support them, and we will stop the poisoning of the American people.
So, Larry, he happens to actually be one of those people that he is decrying, or at least that's where he comes out of the media. But where does this all fit in to this larger war being drummed up? Because the whole drug boat, quote unquote, the strikes, it's been all about Venezuela. So what's your assessment of this?
Again, the claim of combating so-called narco terrorists, it's just an excuse, just a false justification for trying to find a way to get control of the oil and get somebody in charge of Venezuela that's going to be a compliant puppet of the United States. If this was really about stopping the flow of drugs, then Donald Trump would not have pardoned the former president of Honduras, who was serving time for moving massive amounts of narcotics into the United States. He would not have pardoned today Henry Cuellar, a former congressman from South Texas, who was involved with taking serious money from drug traffickers in Mexico. Trump's not consistent on this at all. But again, we're sort of caught militarily right now. I've likened this to somebody who's ever fired a conventional bow and arrow. When you draw that bow back and then hold it, see how long you can hold it. You're in a cock position ready to fire. Well, that's what this U.S. force is off the coast of Venezuela, except they're now going on 4 months, I think, that he's been, doing this. And I think that this, this is not a military force capable of defeating the Venezuelan army. It's a force capable of inflicting some damage on Venezuela. But, just to put it into context, we went into Afghanistan after 2001 with about 140,000 troops. That was the U.S. presence at once we got fully ramped up, and we were unable, with 140,000 troops, we were unable to contain the Taliban and other insurgents in Afghanistan, and we got forced out. We turned tail and ran. We try to be more diplomatic in describing our exit, but that's exactly what happened. We like say, well, the Brits lost too. Yeah, the Russians lost too. Yeah, in the 1980s, except the Russians were there with far fewer. They had 120,000, not 140,000 troops. When we invaded Iraq in 2003, 130,000 troops, and we were unable to quell the opposition in the country. There was active insurgency. We killed a lot of Iraqis, but that didn't stop the insurgents. And ultimately, we declared victory and left, sort of. We still got this huge compound, the Green Zone, built in the middle of Baghdad. So my point in this is, here we got 18,000 troops supposedly offshore, ready to spring into action. When you consider the fact that Venezuela is, it's twice the size, 3 times the size of Vietnam, and its terrain is as rugged as anything in Vietnam, with mountains, triple canopy jungle. Whereas during the Vietnam War, we had to worry about one long border on the west side of Vietnam. Now you got a much longer border along with Brazil to the south and west, and Colombia to the north and west. So uncontrolled borders, essentially. If we launch airstrikes, the Venezuelans actually do have a more capable air defense system, thanks to their support from Russia, China, and Iran, than the Houthis did. That's number one. They have far more military forces that can disperse to the jungle and run insurgencies. So God help us if we try to put any troops in on the ground, they're going to get chewed up and they'll suffer serious losses. So, I think I think their plan was really try to use the intimidation, posturing, and then in hopes that this would convince a few of the commanders in the Venezuelan army to, let's join the gringos because Maduro's getting us into trouble. I actually think it's had the what's happened over the last 4 months has had the reverse effect. Instead of widening the fissure between the pro-Maduro forces and the anti-Maduro forces, it's actually brought some people that were anti-Maduro more onto the Maduro side now because they're sick and tired of U.S. bullying. So it's a mess, and you can't keep this force deployed like this without at some point having to say, okay, return to base. It's just it becomes like I said, holding that bow cocked is going to cause a degradation in muscle and will fatigue you.
Yeah, great points. And the U.S., I mean, the Donald Trump administration has seemingly backed itself into a corner with all it feels like Iran in the sense that there has been constant threats, but this time with also a major buildup, even more significant on the U.S. side, at least, than against Iran. And U.S. troops, if they do end up needing to go in, whether it's special forces or ground troops, they're going to have to contest with not only the Venezuelan military, but also ordinary people who have been training students, grandmothers. Here are pictures of them with rifles and other weaponry to counter a possible attack. Now, the numbers, according to some, are that there's 8 million of these kinds of people. That changes a lot about what could be done, right, Larry? Because casualties, even the relatively, not to make insignificant anyone's death, murder in war, but the ratio, for example, Iraqi to U.S. losses, even that created a major pressure on the U.S. to stop doing what it's doing. This could be perhaps even worse than that if there are ground troops that go in, and maybe worse and faster in terms of the numbers. What's your thoughts about this?
If we force a change in the government, and it's basically seen as handpicked by the United States, there will then be an insurgency in Venezuela. That'll be very, very, very difficult to stop, simply because of, again, the nature of the terrain, the openness of the borders in Brazil and Colombia. Most people who are not familiar with the area will not understand that, like in Colombia, where they've had an aggressive anti-insurgents campaign for years, the FARC, the Fuerzas Armadas Revolucionarias de Colombia, they've been operating for more than 50 years. And, the Colombian army with U.S. assistance tried to wipe them out, tried to defeat them, tried to negotiate. I mean, it's, and actually some of the negotiations worked up to a point. You've had another group, the ERP, and again, they failed to wipe them out in Colombia. So the notion that this could be easily settled with U.S. assistance, forget about it. They'll just get the United States embroiled in another, let's start off as a peacekeeping mission into another war that we didn't need to fight.
Yeah, and there's major divisions even within the Trump camp about the very basis for why that's happening. To go back to the war crime scandal, here is what was played on Fox News recently: a very heated exchange between what usually is supposed, or at least supposed to be, the administration's media arm.
We know that this isn't
Jessica,
a hoax
yes or
because
no?
a best case scenario is that Admiral Bradley, who they're trying to put all the blame on, is the one who authorized the second lethal strike that took out these people who, again, it was a violation of the law that they were killed. We also know that the U.S. doesn't always do this because there was another strike in the Caribbean back in September where a Colombian and an Ecuadorian person survived, and we repatriated them home. We didn't even take them to court here for the crimes that we knew that they'd committed. We sent them back to their home country. There is tons of reporting now. You want to call the Washington Post fake news, that's fine. The New York Times story, by the way, didn't exonerate them. We also have the Wall Street Journal saying that a DOD official says that Hegseth was the, quote, target engagement authority, so the guy in charge. We also know, writ large, that the story about this administration being focused on eradicating American society of drugs is absolute BS because Donald Trump went and pardoned, he's walking free now, the former Honduran president who trafficked 400 tons of cocaine into America. Why did he get to leave prison early? He had a 45-year sentence, which, by the way, Trump administration #1 prosecuted him because Roger Stone is his buddy and because he wrote Donald Trump a letter calling him Your Excellency and saying that they shared conservative values. The problem is the story is changing every 10 minutes. It went from fake news to the frog shooting narco terrorists to it is not changing at all.
Yeah,
actually, once you let me talk, it's completely consistent. Okay. Now it's Admiral Bradley's fault, and I presume that he's getting lawyered up right now.
No. Prediction.
So
will come of this.
Yeah.
So, there's obviously major disagreements over the very basis for this. It feels like WMD is almost all over again, where, but in that time, there was this, what do you call it? The surprise of the new, a kind of drummed up threat that maybe many Americans were not ready for. But it's already happened. And this feels like 2.0, that it's happening again. And even Fox News is having debates about this, which is a bit unprecedented. What's your thoughts about this?
Well, it was still, that was Jessica Tarlov. And so she's the token lefty on the panel. But I agreed with everything that she said because the blatant hypocrisy of the Trump administration. And again, it's all predicated on a false belief that, all we got to do to stop the drug trafficking is kill a bunch of people overseas. One of my business partners, when he was chief of international ops at DEA, he initially came up with a program that's called the Kingpin Program. Now, it wasn't so much about killing the top leaders of the cartels. It was more about let's capture them, arrest them, incarcerate them. It was the assumption that if we take off the top level, it'll cause these organizations to collapse. So what they discovered was drug trafficking cartels are more like balls of mercury. If anybody's ever had a ball of mercury and hit it with a hammer, what happens? It shatters into 100 pieces, and they're each an intact piece. In fact, that's what happened when we went after the Pablo Escobar organization. When I say we, the U.S. government, as well as then going after the Sinaloa cartel in Mexico, the Cali cartel in Colombia, the Knights Templar. What we found was, you may arrest some top-level people, but they reorganize quickly. Their underlings always willing to step up. A lot of money to be made. And the reality is there are a lot of U.S. corporations and financial institutions that profit enormously off of the drug business. And just as we saw, Trump's got very selective outrage on this. Just because you're a buddy of Roger Stone, you get a walk, even though you traffic 400 tons of cocaine, which I'm sure killed one or two people. And then again, this thing with Henry Cuellar. Cuellar's had been receiving money from Mexican drug cartels for years. So it's unfortunate, but it's a lie. And I think, this thing is going to have some traction because just looking at, there are also Republicans outraged by it. And, but particularly in the Pentagon, what they're saying is, hey, they're trying to hang this on all of us. Now, that said, I have little sympathy for any of the officers in this chain of command who carried out these illegal orders. These are illegal orders. You don't, just because the president says it's okay to go kill somebody, the president does not have the constitutional authority to order the murder of anyone. What he can do is, if you want to declare war on a country where you can go then kill their soldiers, you go to Congress. Congress says, yeah, we want to go to war. We want to go kill these people. Then you have the authority to at least engage in war, which includes killing civilians. Not recommended, but we did it in World War II. But not this. This is Trump acting unilaterally outside of presidential authority.
Yeah, and final word, Larry. Do you find that the Trump administration right now, I've been thinking this over, is its only option with Venezuela a kind of Iran flyover, drop bombs, claim victory? Because more and more, I mean, we've heard how many reports that Maduro is on shaky ground, all these fake reports about he's about to go to Qatar, all these fake reports that he was giving Trump everything. And then meanwhile, he's dancing in the streets and talking about how we're going to defend the country with all that we have. It appears that it's going to be a lot harder to topple Nicolas Maduro and that government than was originally advertised. And there's all the consequences that come from a direct military intervention. Is this the only option that Trump has right now? Because obviously the U.S. is going to have to act with all of this talk if it's going to save any face.
Maybe, so the ideal solution would be to get Simon Cowell from America's Got Talent, previous American Idol, Howie Mandel, and then,
really bringing it back with Simon Cowell.
Let's get like an American Got Talent panel, and then have Maduro and Trump do a dance off, okay? And then the audience gets to vote. I think Maduro would win that one. Okay, he's got better moves, but maybe that could become the recipe for settlement of future conflicts. Less bloody, less, it would be painful maybe to watch, but there'd be a lot less grief. Look, I say that tongue in cheek, but
right.
This is. The problem with it doesn't start with Donald Trump. The problem with America is we become accustomed to killing people and just and walking away like it's not our problem. When you look at how many Vietnamese we killed, and maybe I've said, like the only positive thing out of the Vietnam War is we got some great Vietnamese restaurants here in the United States finally. But the lives that were destroyed, and we're not talking, we're talking upward of probably 1 million, at least
a couple, probably. Right.
Yeah. So it is. We've done it there, done it in Syria, Iraq, Afghanistan, Serbia, Libya. We did a little bit in Panama. So we got to stop. We just stop. We've got too much war, and while we're spending all this money overseas, our own cities are crumbling, we've got significant needs here in the United States, but we are enamored of war. The people buy the propaganda each and every time, and it's like so far it looks like most have bought into this stuff about narco-terrorism, and by God, we got to kill them. Makes us feel good, right. But it's never been proven that actually solves the problem.
Yeah. And when I was in Vietnam with the vets, to watch how what they have to do to get any kind of support to Vietnam for all
Mhm.
the absolute devastation that U.S. bombs, unexploded ordinances, Agent Orange, all of this did to the Vietnamese people.
Yeah, yeah.
What they have to do to just get a little bit of support for that is a lot of work, which
Yeah.
shows that the U.S. is not apologetic. The U.S. At least the political class, they're not apologetic. The warmongers, they don't reflect and say, oh well, maybe we should do better, and take care of things here. No, they don't do that. It's just
We
same
make
old thing
money.
happened
We
here.
make money off of it.
Right.
It's a profitable activity.
Yep.
It's shameful, but that's the truth.
Yes, it is. Well, Larry, it's been a great show. I want to make sure that everybody, I'll pull it up now, put it in the video description. Everyone follows your blog at Sonar21. That's where you can follow Larry's work. So I'm just going to pull it up there. It'll be in the video description after this show is done here. So do check that out. Everybody hit the like button because that will continue the conversation for many more voices and eyes to see this. Without further ado, everyone, I'll be back with Scott Ritter and Ray McGovern, two friends of ours, tomorrow, same time, 2 p.m. Eastern. See you then. Larry, any final words before we go?
Nope. Thank you for the opportunity to speak.
All right. Yeah, it's been great. All right, everybody. Take care. Hit that like button before you go. See you tomorrow, 2 p.m. Eastern.